Hey everybody, welcome to lab number 12. We're going to see if we can figure out the kinetics constant using hydrogen peroxide and potassium iodide. This first part, we're going to take some fresh, out of the bottle, H2O2, or hydrogen peroxide. As you can see, I'm peeling off the top. I got this from the drugstore just before coming into school today to ensure that it is as close to 3% as possible. So the first thing you do is you measure out 8 milliliters of the 3% H2O2 solution into a graduated cylinder. The first thing I did there was rinse out my graduated cylinder with the H2O2 just to kind of react anything that might be in there, kind of clean it out. Now I'm going to add a little bit more than 8 milliliters and then take a little bit out. This saves me time rather than trying to put in one drop at a time. So I get down on the level of the meniscus, take out as much as I need, ensure that it's 8 milliliters, and then I transfer that into the graduated cylinder. Now I mixed up my potassium iodide solution in this graduated cylinder, and I'm going to transfer 4 milliliters of the solution to a 50 milliliter beaker. Next I want to grab my syringe and draw 2 milliliters of the 4 milliliters out into the syringe, making sure that I have the exactly right amount, getting any air bubbles out. I go ahead and draw up 2 milliliters of the Ki solution. Once I'm satisfied that I have exactly 2 milliliters, I set the remainder off to the side for the next part of the experiment. Next I gotta set up my Erlenmeyer flask with the stopper and the rubber tubing, and I also need to connect the syringe in because everything connects on this top little rubber stopper. So I connect the tubing, which is connected on the other end to the gas pressure sensor. Then I connect the syringe by giving a little screw into the top, and now everything's sealed up nice and tight. Finally, I mix the two reactants together. I hit collect on my iPad, and I collect data for 120 seconds, as it says in the lab procedure. Now it's time for part 2, but before I do that I want to rinse and clean out my Erlenmeyer flask with some distilled water to ensure that anything from the last reaction has been rinsed out and I have a clean slate moving forward. Now this next part was basically the same procedure as the first part, but instead of 0.5 molar potassium iodide, I'm going to do 0.25 molar potassium iodide. So I measure out my 8 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide just like before, and I delivered it to the Erlenmeyer flask. This next part though is I measure out 2 milliliters of the potassium iodide solution, and this time I add it in with 2 milliliters of distilled water. Now that I've got 4 total milliliters, I can then draw half of that out and put it in with my hydrogen peroxide and mix those together. So here I go, I'm going to draw out 2 milliliters of the distilled. I'm going to mix them together, push the plunger, stir, and wait for 20 seconds, collecting data once again. Finally, in this last experiment, the procedure is once again the same, but this time I'm going to use half concentration of hydrogen peroxide. So I measure out 4 milliliters of the hydrogen peroxide, then I go ahead and add 4 milliliters of water, leaving me with 8 total milliliters of hydrogen peroxide. Then I go back and measure out 2 milliliters of the original 0.5 molar potassium iodide solution. Here I am, grabbing that Ki, putting on, mixing them together, give it a quick swirl, and collect data. Here's the data for the first trial, or part 1. You can see on the statistics that I have the X and the Y highlighted. Make sure these X's and Y's get into your data table in the lab write-up so you can calculate the rate. Here's the X and Y for trial 2. And finally, here's trial 3. And once again, I've got the change in X and change in Y highlighted. Now it's your job to do the rest of the calculations, figuring out the rate law and calculating K for this reaction. Don't forget the analysis questions at the bottom. That takes care of this lab. Thanks for watching.